This is not the first time I have tried to be an entrepreneur. On this current stream of actually knowing what I want and building a business around being a creator and being an artist, dream goals, I finally found like I have found my footing. But this wasn't the first time I tried to start a business or be self sufficient where I didn't have to rely on external income. So let's talk about it. Most entrepreneurs you see who are successful have started multiple businesses before, and most of them have failed. They might have found success, but the one they're on now, chances are, was not their first. And I think that is true of a lot of people. Sometimes, in order to know what you want, you have to know first what you do not want. And a lot of times, the only way to really gain clarity around what you don't want is to experience it. And I think this is very reflective in the other businesses that I have tried to start for myself. I won't dig into all of them, but to name a few, I was a virtual assistant freelance, which I kind of consider as my own business. A lot of people make freelance income their full-time income. In that time where I was doing this regularly on and off for about 4 or 5 years, um, I pulled in almost enough, to support myself without having to need another job. I worked for various blogs, websites. I've worked for authors. Some of the stuff I did in there was helping people who were running online courses. This is before what I would call the online course boom. I mean, we're talking 10 years ago when they weren't super big. So there wasn't as much advice and help for that back then, but I learned as I went. I was a book formatter, so I formatted books for print and ebook for different indie authors who, usually wound up self-publishing through Amazon. I, for a little bit, tried being a full-time writer. that one's actually come into play a few times. One of these cases in particular, I was writing short fiction, some short spicy romance, and a little bit lighter romance that I would just self-publish under pen names. Consistently, I actually continue to pull in $5 to $10 a month most months, which is pretty impressive considering they weren't the greatest, and I wrote them 8 years ago, 9 years ago, 10. I don't know, something like that. It was a long time ago. I have also tried to be a writer in the sense of articles. Now, this one has taken multiple formats over the years. Sometimes I've put more work into it, sometimes I've put less. But within that, I've tried to start a blog a few times. I think one of my proudest moments, though, was getting an article I published on Medium to like first page Google results. I was really impressed by that because, that if you know, you know. So I would write for myself, and then I would also freelance as an article writer for other blogs and websites. And I think for me, part of why that one didn't work was because a lot of what I was writing wasn't necessarily what I wanted to be writing. It was what I knew the audiences of those websites liked reading. And, it worked pretty well. I would sometimes get a couple $100 a week. I think the most I got was probably around $600 a month for writing, but it sharpened those skills. While I haven't published a full-length novel before, I have written multiple novels. Woo! Sorry, lost. Some to full completion, and some there might just be like 2 chapters missing. But the thing I struggled with was the editing. So the full-length novel writing, while I love it and I might come back to it in the future, it wasn't where the money was at for me. I put that in the bucket of failed entrepreneur. Maybe not failed entrepreneur like jobs, but definitely something that I decided I didn't want to pursue. I've tried art before, um, long time ago, back right after high school and before I started college. I did try to start an Etsy shop and sell some of my art, and I didn't know anything about it. Honestly, I didn't talk about it anywhere. I just kind of listed it and hoped for the best until the Etsy shop got shut down for not paying the fees. But that was 12 years ago. We've gotten a little better since then. What else have I done? I have taken on other people's blogs and websites. Thought I was going to run them, decided not to. I have also, like many women in North America, I feel like I've dabbled in direct sales. Yep, I did. I did that for almost 2 years, honestly. Some months I would actually bring in a couple thousand, which was pretty exciting, but ultimately it wasn't what I wanted to do. I felt like I needed to be pushier than I was, and honestly, it gave me the ick. It was fun to say. I don't normally say that, but it definitely did. And I love the idea of direct sales. Just, it wasn't where it was at for me. It might work for some people, but I think that market isn't always the best, if you know what I mean. Let's see, what else have I done in my failed entrepreneurships? I've tried turning content into an income before. Um, I definitely have done that a time or two, but I think part of that was I didn't know what I wanted, and I was also just largely following trends, the dancing to the trending audios and lip syncing badly, and that's not what not my cup of tea. Um, and well, I'm trying to think. I think those are pretty much a majority of the ones that I've actually put a consistent time and effort into. On the other hand, I have also planned out a lot of businesses in my head. I like thoughts. I like thinking. I like planning. And a lot of times I will plan a bunch, but not implement. And so there's also been a few businesses like that. I've planned whole restaurants and bakeries in my head. I've thought about becoming a farmer with a little food stand selling mushrooms or microgreens or, baby plants. And well, that one doesn't work very well because I'm not really good at keeping plants alive. But, I have a boyfriend now and he's really good at that. I've come up with multiple like nonprofit ideas that have days and weeks worth of planning behind them, knowing all the logistics, knowing how much those things would cost, knowing actually what category that business fits into. And again, that's one I haven't done anything with. But the one thing all of these things have in common is that I've learned a lot. I have taken in so much information, both from trying and failing to start a business, but also from the people I worked with while working on those businesses, such as being a freelance, virtual assistant, website manager. I learned great customer service skills, though. I feel like I kind of already had that. I also learned how to run a website. I got pretty good at copywriting and SEO. I I am proficient in article writing. I'm also proficient in short story writing. Proficient isn't the right word. I like writing. Okay. Um, you know, and I feel like all of these things that I have tried over the years, they all had lessons that needed to be learned. And in learning those lessons, I learned the things I want and the things I didn't. I learned what worked for me and I learned what didn't. I learned how to show up consistently and when to stop showing up consistently because it wasn't the right path for me. And while today a lot of what I focus on is around creating content and showing up on social media, and creating art and products with my art, which I love. I do have other plans. I do have other things I want to do. I've created a planner, but I've planned out about 10 other trackers, notebooks, tarot card notebooks so you can keep track of your readings, as an example. And I've created so many of these things. And I know as my business progresses, there are definitely things I will incorporate in the future. The cookbook I started writing, Cook Your Own Adventure, because it was so fun. So you'd have a base recipe and then like 10 variations of that recipe. So then no matter what you had or what you were feeling, you could kind of work with anything. I feel like that's one I'll probably pick back up at some point. But same with the planners, same with writing poetry or writing music, which feels a little intimidating to talk about because singing and music was something I didn't let myself think about for the longest time. But down the road, when the time is right, that's probably something that'll also be incorporated into my music or into my business because this is a part of who I am. And all this to say, if you're an entrepreneur, if you've tried multiple businesses and to date they've all failed, that doesn't mean you're a bad entrepreneur. It just means they weren't the right one or it wasn't the right time. But I think a trait that every entrepreneur has is the willingness to try again, to keep going, to be thinking of ideas. And just because you have a good idea doesn't mean you need to act on that good idea. But sometimes there will be good ideas that you do want to act on, that you do want to give a shot. And, they might work, they might not. They might help give you a stability and, a solid foundation for a year or two, and then you might decide to completely pivot. And that's okay. There's very few things in life that once you make that decision are locked in, solid, cannot be changed. Some things, obviously. But I don't know. Give yourself the freedom. Give yourself the freedom to fail, to try new things, to decide what you want to do and what you don't. Because at the end of the day, it's kind of what life is about.